All right. Hello, everyone. We want to welcome Minnesota Society of Professional Engineer members and guests. First of all, I want to make you aware that this program is being recorded. Also, I want to thank you for joining us for today's seminar. Our goal in offering these programs is to offer opportunities for professional engineers and others in the industry to connect around business and technical conversations. If you have colleagues interested in joining us, please let them know about some of our upcoming programs and our online recorded webinar library. Professional development hours are free for members. By way of introduction, my name is Jason Versteg. I'm a civil engineer working for Dunnick out of the Willmar area. I've been involved with Minnesota Society of Professional Engineers for a number of years, serving both leadership at our local chapter for some time before joining the State Professional Development Committee a few years back. This is your first program with us this season. As you can see, we are using a familiar name, Minnesota Society of Professional Engineers. Our organization has undergone quite a few changes in the last couple of years. After gathering member input over the last several months, and considering the best ways to serve our PE community going forward, our board of directors recently announced we are rejoining the National Society of Professional Engineers and returning to the familiar MSPE name. Our board and consultants, Katie Jamieson and Diane O'Brien, are currently working with the NSPE leadership to update our operations and administrative structure. So going forward, Minnesota PEs will continue to be able to take full advantage of our leading edge professional education, including our ethics programming and Math Counts volunteer opportunities, as you have always done. We expect this full transition process will take several months. Taking our time with this transition ensures we will have updated operations and efficiencies in place so that you can get the most value from your membership, both locally and nationally. As part of this transition, we will be taking November off from our regular webinar programming, but we want to invite you to please save the date for a joint NSPE, MNSPE event the evening of December 8th. Details will be coming soon. So I would like to now introduce my colleague, Chris Krampitz, who will be hosting with me today and will introduce our speaker. So please welcome Chris.
Thank you, Jason, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Krampitz, and I'm one of the members of the Professional Development Committee for MNSPE, the team works to bring you these webinars and different programming for professional engineering education. A quick note, participants today will receive certificates for PDHs. They will be sent via email from Katie after our program. Please do allow her some time to process the attendance, and then she will send them out. So if you don't hear from her in a couple days, then please contact us. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to take a minute to thank your annual sponsors whose support makes our annual educational programming possible, and as an included part of the individual membership. If your organization is not yet a sponsor, we invite you to learn more and join us. You can contact Katie at hello@mnspe.org to learn more about joining and sponsoring. I am pleased to introduce our speakers today, Tom Pohl and Courtney Jasper. They're both with the firm Messarelli Kramer and lobby on behalf of MNSPE and licensed PEs in Minnesota. Today, they will cover the role government relations and lobbying play in the engineering profession. Today, Tom is a shareholder at Messarelli Kramer and advocates, advises, and represents clients before the state government. He has worked in unique roles at the federal, state, and local government levels and has worked in the Minnesota State Auditor's Office and for the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. He has led key initiatives for some of the most complex, high-profile legislation in the state, including the Twins Ballpark, the Corridor Light Rail Transit Project, and the Marriage Equality Act. Courtney is a lobbyist at Messarelli Kramer and represents clients before the Minnesota legislature. governor's office, and state agencies. She has worked for the firm in the past as both a legislative coordinator and as a law clerk. She has also worked at the Department of Administration, where she planned the award-winning Minnesota State Capitol grand opening. If you'd like to ask questions during today's program, you can do so via the Zoom chat feature. Just drop your questions in there, and Katie will ask your questions of the presenters. And you can ask those questions as we go through the presentation. And if you like, you can ask your questions also at the end. We'll allow some time towards the end. So having said that, Tom and Courtney, we welcome you. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you first and foremost to MSPE for hosting this event, and thank you all for taking time during your lunch break to join us. Courtney and I are excited to be here and talk a little bit about what we do. Really, our goal, we want to provide some insight as to what we do for MSPE, what we do in terms of the world of government relations and how that interacts with MSPE and engineers and the engineering profession. So today we'll talk a little bit about the legislature and what happens in terms of legislative activities. Also cover the regulatory side, rulemaking, what happens, administrative law within state agencies and the governor's office. Also the work we do with our state licensing board. And then we'll provide a little update on the upcoming legislative session that's going to start in January. A little bit on the political landscape and the elections that are coming in November. And finally, we have a special guest. Representative John Burkle will join us at the latter half of our presentation to give you a little insight as to what it's like to be a legislator. And then he'll also talk about a piece of legislation he passed last year dealing with residency requirements for county engineers. So a good opportunity to interact with a public policymaker. And as indicated, please, if anyone has questions at any time, just jump in and ask them, whether it's through the chat feature or through Katie, just to let us know, and we're happy to take questions. In fact, encourage them. It'll be far more interactive and I think enjoyable for everybody if we have some Q&A and dialogue as opposed to just Courtney and I talking at you the whole time. So with that said, just a little introduction about Meserly & Kramer and our team. Meserly & Kramer is a mid-sized kind of business-focused Minneapolis-based law firm. We do, though, have a dedicated government relations practice. And so we have an office in St. Paul. It's actually right across the street from the Capitol, where we office. We have a team of 6 lobbyists and 3 legislative coordinators who help support our efforts at the Capitol. Our team's government relations efforts, our focus is solely in that area. So we don't do other things outside of government relations. And really, we focus at the state and local level. So we don't spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C. We really focus representing our clients here in Minnesota and really trying to figure out how to help them navigate government. I think anybody that's interacted with government knows how challenging that can be at times, whether it's smaller scale, whether it's getting something approved at the city council or passing a bill at the state legislature. It is Courtney Jasper, who you'll meet here in a minute, and myself, and then Shiloh Larson, now Huddleston. She just got married. She is our coordinator, and so she's the one that sends out all the updates and information. So a lot of times, if you see emails coming, they will probably have her name on them. She puts together the weekly updates that we help provide information for, as well as provide the legislative update at the session, at the end of the legislative session. So that said, I think enough was really said about me. I'm a shareholder with Meserly & Kramer, been there about 21 years. Prior to that, I did have some experience working in Washington, D.C. for Congressman Frenzel. So I had an opportunity to spend some time in the city out there and learn a little bit about the federal side of politics, and then came to Minnesota, went to law school and worked for a number of different entities. The state auditor was really the first place I kind of cut my teeth with respect to government relations and learning how to deal with the legislature and agencies. And then also went to the Department of Labor and Industry, both on the legal and legislative affairs side. So I've had a little experience dealing with the constitutional office, administrative, and then working within the legislature, wheeling with House and Senate members for the last 21 years, representing clients, and really a variety of different clients. I represent, companies like Apple, healthcare clients like Twin Cities Orthopedics, financial services like AIG, as well as, kind of one events or specific initiatives like the Twin Stadium or the Light Rail or North Star Corridor or others. And so it's been a pleasure and an honor to be able to work on some really important pieces of legislation for the state and helped learn the practice. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney to have her introduce herself, and we'll get rolling. Courtney.
Thanks, Tom. And it's nice to be spending this hour with you all. My name's Courtney Jasper. I work with Tom at Messerly and Kramer, and together we represent MNSPE at the legislature. Little bit of my background, and then we'll jump into the more interesting stuff. I have worked at the firm for quite a while in multiple roles. I'm currently lobbying. Outside of my time at the firm, I've worked and have managed many local campaigns. I also have worked at the Department of Administration, and I am currently in my last semester of law school. So all that being said, on to the more interesting stuff. And of course, there we go. So like I said earlier, Tom and I represent MNSPE at the legislature, and what we do as your lobbyists, as the lobbyists for MNSPE, is we attend the legislative advocacy committee meetings monthly, and we advise MNSPE on election and legislative developments that directly affect MNSPE members. It can be really difficult for people who don't live and breathe the legislature constantly to know what's going on in St. Paul at all times. And so our job is to try to translate all that's happening in St. Paul to you in a way that is informative and helpful and easy to swallow. We also monitor issues that are important to MNSPE and those that primarily impact the engineering profession and the professional engineering licensure, including we monitor executive actions that the governor puts into place. We pay attention to legislative actions, which means we read every bill that's introduced. This past session, it was about 2,000 in each body to make sure that we know of any that may affect your profession. We watch for different amendments to bills. We also pay attention to the state registrar so we can be fully aware of any potential rules that may be changed. We also attend the Minnesota Board of Architecture, Engineering, Land Surveying, Landscape Architecture, Geoscience, and Interior Design to make sure we know what the board is doing so that we can inform you all and also inform them if there are any concerns amongst members. So that's a little bit about what we do directly.
Courtney, can I just jump in real quick there on, I know some people may be looking at this and say executive actions, what does that mean? Or how does that pertain to our practice? I think a really good example of an area that Courtney and I spent a lot of time last year was with the governor's emergency authority or emergency powers and what kind of restrictions he put on the engineering, as well as a lot of different practices, professional practices, and just life in general. And so we worked with the governor, with the governor's office on his executive order language and what that meant for engineering companies, for engineers, really starting with who is essential and who can actually go to work during that COVID period of time, and just structuring that piece. And we went back and forth on that language quite a bit to make sure that engineers would continue to be able to do the essential things that they needed to do, as well as the return to work when people were able to come back, in what sequence and who we worked with the governor's office on as well, to make sure that it worked for engineers. So that's one thing. Hopefully we're done with that for a while and won't have to go back to that. But that is something that we spent a fair amount of time on trying to help the profession. Go ahead. Sorry, Courtney.
No, thank you for that clarification. And so one of the main things that we really try to track for MNSPE is professional licensing. So here's a couple of couple of bills that we've tracked this past year and in previous years that are of interest to you all. First is the Minnesota Practices Act, which defines who qualifies as professional engineer under state law. And so that's really what governs the profession according to law. And so that is something that when bills are introduced, we make sure that there will not be any changes to that and that we are aware of any changes that might be made. One bill that came up this past session that was certainly one that'd be of interest to you all was House File 266, which was introduced by Representative Mortensen from Shakopee, that would make all occupational licenses void. So this is a bill that we saw, and immediately we had our interest peaked, and we reached out to Representative Mortensen to talk to him about the bill, about his intentions and his goals with us, and to share some concerns that some of the engineers that we work with had. And he was willing to hear the concerns, but shared that he was just opposed to all occupational licenses. This is a bill that, because it was introduced in this biennium, which is this 2-year period, is still potentially at play this session. That being said, it does not have a Senate companion, and we have not seen any traction on it, but we will be watching it closely to see if anything changes so that we can be proactive if anything is happening. But that was certainly one that we watched really closely. And this next bill was a bill that Senator Weber introduced. And Tom, I think you might be better equipped to talk about this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Courtney. We see from time to time different licensing issues that pop up in legislation. Courtney had mentioned Representative Mortensen's, which is certainly on the extreme side. To just get rid of all professional licensure is a shocker of a piece of legislation, and wasn't all that well received in terms of support. But there are different bills for very specific reasons. This next one had to do with emergency management. It really was kind of the wake of when a natural disaster occurs in the state, who, in terms of professionals, are allowed to come in and help everything from restore power to help rebuild things. This legislation dealt with that. And what this legislation wanted to do was really expedite that, to get people in quick without lots of red tape. And certainly a worthy goal and something that's important, but at the same time, the public needs to be reassured that those people that are coming in, that are working, are qualified. And so that's where we met with Representative Weber, Senator Weber, and others to talk about our concern with the way the language was drafted. What we really wanted was to just make sure people were qualified that were coming in, but be able to do it quickly. Ultimately, what we ended up resolving the language on was to say, essentially, you had to be in good standing with your license, your engineering license in the state where you're coming from, in order to be able to come here and do work, rather than having to go through all of the Minnesota specific requirements. So kind of a middle of the road solution, but one that I think we were all comfortable with. The bill didn't get enough traction to pass. It's still out there, so it's not law, but I think just another good example of where licensure issues come into play with the legislature.
Apologize, I was on mute. Another issue that's one that we talk about with our Legislative Advocacy Committee is continuing education. All licensees must obtain 24 professional development hours within their 2-year period for their biennial renewal. Congratulations, you're all getting one right now, a little bit closer to your full renewal. And so currently, there are 2 hours that must be dedicated to professional ethics. But besides that, there are not other requirements, but there have been proposals to try to tailor those requirements further. One was a bill that was introduced by Senator Torres Ray in 2020 that would have required all professional engineers to dedicate 2 of their professional development hours to studying climate change. And if we all know anything about 2020, it's that things didn't go exactly how we expected. And that was very much the case at the legislature. And so when she introduced this bill, the legislature did not finish up and get all of their work done. So there were a lot of things that were left aside. But this was that was something that was proposed in the past and is another example of how the legislature can really affect licensure and the practice. There have been other states that have made it a requirement to include sexual harassment training for PDH hours for professional engineers. That has not, we have not seen a bill on that in Minnesota. That being said, it doesn't mean it would not happen in the future. But that is something that people are looking at, is how do you change the continuing education requirements to change the future of the field? So certainly something interesting to keep our eye on moving forward.
Yeah, Courtney, I'll take this next slide. And so I know there's a lot of folks on the call that probably have interest or watch different pieces of legislation. There's a lot of bills out there that impact not only engineers, but the engineering profession. And we try and keep an eye on all of those and update you as to the progress of those. As Courtney said, our laser focus is on licensure, but there's certainly a lot of other ancillary issues that are important. And some of them are, at the front end, where we want to make sure there is a pipeline of engineers going forward. So we do help support and focus STEM funding in the K-12 space to make sure that there's adequate resources for science and engineering and that that's supported. There's also workforce programs that we know are needed and helpful. That's obviously a huge issue. I'm sure everybody on this Zoom is impacted by labor issues in one way or another. So we look at and work with the Department of Economic Development on programs, on funding programs that will help all of you and the businesses you work for make sure that there are engineers and a strong pipeline of those trained workers. We also look at infrastructure investments. This next year is going to be a bonding bill, so another big year opportunity to invest some state dollars in projects, and whether it is transportation projects or energy projects or water, wastewater, lots of infrastructure opportunities for engineers and engineering companies that we help support and advocate for. Also energy, a big issue, as Courtney mentioned, climate change. There was a push, and it's really about educating the profession on the impact and even the professional liability on impact to climate change, and making sure engineers have enough of that information to build into the practice. And there is certainly a lot of interest in change in the energy area on renewables. And so we try and monitor those changes and provide input to policymakers when they're drafting bills around what makes sense from those that actually have to either build it or implement it or design it. And we try and provide that context for them. A lot of tax issues, I think all of you, whether it's income tax issues personally you care about, or if you're a small business, corporate taxes, but tax issues are significant, and we watch those. The one that has popped up over the last 4 or 5 years, probably the last 10 years, is the sales tax on professional services. Some states have that where they tax professional services, and some services, not others. We right now only tax a limited subset of engineering services, but there has been a big effort to try and include professional services, whether it's business to business or just professional services as a whole, as a way to kind of revamp the tax code. So that's something we watch. Don't necessarily know it's going to get a lot of traction this next year, but it is an issue that's kind of looming out there. And there's been a study done to kind of take a look at the impact, and we band together with CPAs and attorneys and others when that issue is moving or moves forward. And then there's just different kinds of legal issues. Indemnification has been a big issue in the past, as well as the statute of repose that we look out for engineers on. Quality-based services is another issue. Certificate of merit was one we worked on people wanting to sue professionals, what kind of a baseline they need for that to move forward. So lots of different legislative issues we try and keep an eye on and update all of you on. And then there's also regulatory issues that are relevant that we watch and try and move forward on. And I'll just touch on a couple of them. This may be a little bit out of sequence on the slides here, but let me just touch on a couple. One, when it comes to rulemaking, Courtney and I try and keep an eye on what the agencies are doing and the impact to the profession. We saw a pretty big initiative on the rulemaking side not that long ago that dealt with professional conduct. And so they wanted to kind of rewrite the whole rules around professional conduct. And it really dealt with everything from what you're putting on your application to your conduct to employment to everything from solicitations to statements to competence to conduct, your practices, just jurisdiction. A whole host of different things were included in that professional conduct rewrite. So we would get that as part of the rulemaking. It's not legislators that are deciding, but it is an administrative body that looks at those rules, allows for comment and feedback. So we got a lot of really good comments and feedback on these rules, submitted those to the board and to others to get some of those changes implemented. And then typically, if there is no major, discussion on concern with respect to the actual language itself, then it just goes forward. But sometimes these things are contested, and then you're talking about a whole nother process on representing the association through a contested rulemaking process. So that was one. And then there was another one that wasn't that long ago on gas line replacement that was more of a federal NTSB issue on pipelines and the engineering component in that, and really what kind of professional engineering requirements were needed, and whether or not they could be waived and under what circumstances. So we dealt with the governor's office, with the National Engineering Association, with our ACEC trade and some others to try and get language that worked under that pipeline scenario. So there's just a couple examples on the rulemaking side as well, outside of the legislative realm. Thanks, Courtney. You can go to the next slide.
You're welcome. And I'm actually going to jump a few slides ahead because we have our special guest here. I'm very excited to introduce you all to Representative Buerkle. He's a fourth generation turkey producer from Badger, Minnesota, and is currently serving his first term as a legislature. He serves on Agriculture, Finance and Policy Committee, the Human Services Finance and Policy Committee, and the Industrial, Education and Economic Development Finance and Policy Committee. He is in his 20th year of being on the board of directors at Northern Pride, Inc., a grower-owned turkey processing and marketing cooperative based in Thief River Falls. He has also served on the Minnesota Turkey Growers Association board of directors and was the chairman of the organization in 2005. He is an absolutely fabulous member of the legislature, and of interest to all of you, this past session, he authored House File 1058, which ended up passing as part of the Transportation Omnibus Bill. And it was a bill that eliminated the state residency requirement for county highway engineers. So I'm sure there may be some of you on the call that may have questions for him about that, but I would just like to formally welcome Representative Buerkle, and thank you for joining us today.
All right, can you hear me okay, Courtney?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, thank you. Well, thanks for the invite, folks. Really appreciate the chance to talk to someone. I have to speak as a new member. I don't know if I'm a fabulous member of the legislature yet, Courtney. I appreciate that, but I am learning, and it's been a steep learning curve, made steeper with COVID, but I really appreciate the chance to get to talk to you folks, and look forward to meeting you all in person at some point. Unfortunately, it's looking like this next session might be kind of a mess again, at least on the House side. And not having people in the halls has been disappointing for me because I know how things are supposed to look down there. And but at some point in the future, we will meet. But I have got the chance to meet with Courtney We got to fish a little bit up here at Lake of the Woods last month, and I'll start there. I'll get back to the omnibus bill and the residency requirement first, but I got to tell a story because part of your ask was, the best way to interact with legislators. And I know from my experience in the turkey industry early on in '99, when I first got on the Minnesota Turkey Growers Board, that was one of the first things we did is we ended up at the Capitol lobbying our issues, mainly agency issues with, like MPCA and such. And so I know that was one of the asks you had was, talking about interacting with legislators. And I want you to know that Courtney is an excellent fisherwoman, I guess we got to say. And I always think one of the best ways to interact is with stories. It seems like stories are always the thing that catch people's ear and resonate. And as we were fishing on our second day, Courtney decided to take some of her oatmeal cookies. And you didn't patent this yet, did you, Courtney?
Not yet.
Okay. So we were having a slow fishing day. The walleyes were not biting. And Courtney decided that oatmeal raisin cookies had to be the trick. And lo and behold, she caught the most fish that afternoon. And so we all learned a lot from Courtney that day. Had a great time. But the point I'm trying to make, more than her fishing prowess, is the fact that forever, this is the first time I've met Courtney as a lobbyist. And forever in our memories as we work together moving forward, that will be a story that we both have together, that experience in that moment that kind of connects you. And so it's that connection to legislators and like Tom was saying earlier, and I haven't met Tom, look forward to meeting you at some point, Tom, but it's not just legislators, it's agencies. And I learned that early on as well. When we were lobbying our turkey issues at the state and at the federal level. I was on the National Turkey Federation board for 11 years as well. And it's those agencies as much as anybody that you need to get to. And it's always good to have lobbyists that I've always appreciated the fact that lobbyists are, probably the closest and have their ear to the ground much sooner than anyone in your industry does. I knew that for a fact in the turkey industry, that if I needed to know something, you could always call those people that were lobbying the issues to really know them well. So I know that lobbyists sometimes get a bad rap and it's easy to beat them up, but I've always appreciated what they bring to the table. And if I've got a question, to be honest, they'll be one of the first people I call, not because somehow they're magic, but because they definitely understand the issues well and they give you the insight. So like I said before, it's stories. And so, back in 2015, our industry went through a really terrible incident where we had high path avian influenza float through the state of Minnesota. Some of you might or might not remember that, but I remember it well because our farm was impacted by that. And we spent a lot of time with the Board of Animal Health and legislators at the state level. Dan Fabian at that point was our House member back then. And Leroy Stump was our DFL state senator up here before Mark Johnson. Knew them both well from our days lobbying issues at the Capitol, as well as Congressman Colin Peterson. And so in that moment when the crisis happened, it was always good to know that I had the relationships built prior to the event. And so what I'd encourage you all to do is to make sure that you build those relationships with your legislators and with those agencies, because really when the moment comes that you need them and you need to know who to call, that's what I fell back on is the folks that I knew the issues well. And so I'd encourage you all, it's the stories that you remember and it's the relationships that are built. And that's why right now during COVID, and if you talk to any of my new member colleagues, they'd tell you the same thing. The frustration we've had this last year plus has been not making those relationships in the proper way. Zoom calls are nice. And for me, 6 hours from St. Paul, it's been helpful to connect at some level, but it's really the personal touch that matters. So in any case, just know that Courtney's a great fisherwoman. And she came up with a great idea. She actually got us filled out that day. I think we actually had something to take home and eat. So with that, I'll move on to next session. I'll kind of tie it in with the county engineers bill. If you got questions, feel free to stop me or we can stop at the end. But we had an issue up here with, I have 4 counties, Kittson County and Roseau County, and then Pennington County and Marshall County. But the 2 northernmost counties, Kittson and Roseau, were struggling greatly and have been struggling for over a year trying to hire a county engineer. And I was approached by the county commissioners in Roseau with the idea of maybe tweaking the law a little bit as far as residency requirements go, in particular for border counties like Kitson, who had been sharing with Pennington and Marshall. They've been kind of sharing county engineers, but everybody was strapped to the max. And so we looked at it and talked some with AMC and Emily Murray over there, and kind of came to an agreement that, you know, as long as we stayed with the county engineer requirement, just the residency requirement, and did nothing more, that they'd be neutral on the bill. And as it turned out, Roseau County was able to hire, well, I'll back up a hair. Kitson County was actually in the works where they interviewed someone who had moved to Grand Forks, an engineer who was interested in the job, but had just purchased a house, and they were in the middle of, their kids were in school and they had young children, and it was just, I mean, they were really literally half an hour from work. They could have drove to Hallock for work every day, but because of that requirement, they really legally couldn't hire them. And so we kind of looked at, could this be changed? And I talked to Chair Hornstein about it. Another situation where getting to know the chairs of the committees has been tough as well, but he was very gracious and listened and said, this sounds like an idea has merit, and was willing to give it a hearing, which has been difficult as well, just to get a hearing on some of this stuff. So I was glad to see it pass. I was glad to see it go through. I don't know where everyone on this call stands on it. I know there was concerns that it would go farther, and there was concerns about whether or not consulting engineers would be discussed, and if it would move farther than that. I know that our counties had hoped that we could maybe extend the conversation down the road, but in the moment, the residency requirement was all they were asking for. And as it turns out, Roseau now has hired an engineer from Grand Forks who's driving every day, and has helped them a great deal. So, so moving forward into 22, just to spring off of that, I know that some of the members of the county commissioners in District 1A would still like to have that conversation about consulting engineers, in particular a county like Kitson, where there's 4,000 people, just over 4. I think it might be close to 4,500 residents in the entire county. And of course, hiring a county engineer there with such a small tax base, and it's a struggle for smaller counties like that, in rural areas in particular. I know they want to continue that conversation. I've been willing to talk about it. And that's one of those things where I think with Courtney's help and other lobbyists and Emily Murray at AMC, we can at least have the conversation. I think understanding the perspective from these smaller counties in rural areas, at minimum, just having that conversation would be helpful. Maybe we can come up with some ideas that would help them, but maybe it's not consulting engineers. At any case, that's one issue moving forward in 22 that I'd like to continue working on. We have other transportation issues up here, of course, that in particular in Oslo, Minnesota. You probably all don't know my area as well as others, but in northwestern Minnesota, the Red River has this funny, it's rare you see rivers run north, and I'll leave it at that. So when the ice, Oslo, that's good to know. So when the ice goes out, we have these ice jams up here, and Oslo in particular is one of those cities that really gets hit hard, especially with the flood diversion plans that have happened in the Grand Forks and Fargo areas. So as the red thaws out in the spring, and the ice, of course, in the north end is still there, the flooding is exacerbated in small communities that don't have the same kind of flood diversions and such. And there's a project coming up the DOT has on the docket for 2025, I believe, putting in a new bridge in Oslo. And some of the folks there have gotten together, the ag groups, local city leaders, and we're hoping we could do something a little bigger, maybe some flood mitigation along with the bridge project. If you know Oslo, the bridge that crosses into North Dakota there has a railroad bridge right next to it. So there's this old, some of you, if you're engineers, and this is who I'm talking to, but if you understand transportation, would probably remember it's got a turnstile bridge. It actually can turn on a pivot. So there's these big pillars in the middle of the river there next to the bridge, the highway bridge that goes through, and there's endless log or ice jams in that spot on the river in the spring. And so they have some really major flood events. Has cost emergency declarations have cost the state a lot of money over the last years, and they would like to see a little bigger project happen. The problem there, of course, is dollars. It always is. And you're dealing not only with Minnesota, but North Dakota, and then a federal issue with the interstate. And then as you move north of the interstate, you're heading into the international issue with, as it connects up in Pembina. So anything you do downstream as that river runs north makes for a problem. So there's a lot of issues involving that bridge, but I would like to see if we could maybe amp that job up a little bit. And as they move into 2025, maybe make that a bigger project than it is now. I think it would help Oslo out. And of course, once they do more flood diversions in Fargo, it's going to make things worse down there. So I'm hoping we can fix that. And then one last thing I think that's important. I really try to make it a point to stay as local as I can possibly stay up here and represent 1A in particular, just the local issues. One that a lot of folks in the metro area probably don't understand as well as folks up here do is the wolf depredation problems we have in livestock and elk depredation as well, with the elk herds that are in Kitson County in particular, and then around Grigla area, Minnesota. So I'd like to see us at least delve into the concept of a wolf hunt. I know it can be a very contentious issue, but we have more and more wolf depredation problems in our area. And so as a livestock producer myself and turkey farmer, I kind of can relate to those issues. So I'm going to push hard on that, at least the conversation and what we can do. We have funded quite a bit of depredation money over the last number of years in the Department of Ag, and I'm on that committee, so I understand that program reasonably well, and would like to see that expanded. In the end, if we're going to protect these wolves, we got to protect the livestock farmers that are feeding them. And you'd be surprised at how many wolf depredation problems we have up here. So with that, I don't want to take up too much time, but be happy to answer any questions if you have some, or tell you more about Courtney's fishing.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you so much for giving us all of that background information. Does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, Representative Burkle knows I'm happy to ask him questions.
Oh yeah, she is.
Well, I guess I'll kick it off, and maybe more of you can think about some questions. But this was your first year as a legislator. It was a remote session, very different from any others. But what was the most rewarding part of your first year as a legislator? Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, let me think about that. What I've really enjoyed the most, and like I said, I've tried to stay local, is you get the constituent issues that come up. And right now, even today, I'll give you the example today, we've been struggling. We have I've got a number of emails, not just a number. My inbox has been filled with problems with driver's tests for folks trying to get CDL licenses, or their 15, 16-year-old is looking to get a road test, and they've got to drive to Bemidji or to Detroit Lakes to get a test done. Now, for some of you probably, Detroit Lakes might be northern Minnesota, but it really isn't. And so folks who have to drive all the way to DL or to Bemidji for a test probably take, 3 hours one way. They might have to take a day off of work. I had one call where a family actually got a room in Detroit Lakes because their son wanted to practice driving a bit in Detroit Lakes. Had never been there before. And so helping folks get those kind of issues resolved has really been rewarding, whatever they might be. This morning, I found out we're finally going to get Thief River Falls driver's exam station opened up November 15th. I'd called DMV last week and the lease was still up in Thief River. They were still paying for a leased building and had one tester there they were running to Bemidji and Detroit Lakes to do the tests. And we have folks driving from Hallock to Detroit Lake. It was insanity. So I was glad to help push some of that along. So I guess short answer to that question is helping folks back home has really been probably the most rewarding part. And that's just one example, I guess.
Tom, I think you're muted.
Yep.
There you go.
There we go.
Sure.
If nobody else has got one to jump in, I will ask you a question as well. First, thank you very much for joining us. And I too felt the pain on the driver's license. My son had to take his test not that long ago, and we searched high and low and ended up having to go pretty far just to get him to be able to take the test. So I agree. That's a pain point that certainly needs to be resolved for Minnesotans. But in terms of the folks on the call, the engineers, what advice do you have for them on interacting with legislators? If they're, a lot of these folks probably haven't talked to a legislator or reached out, some maybe have, but is there a preferred mode of communication or any tips or advice for somebody that is on the call that might want to talk to their legislator?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I know there's hesitancy sometimes to reach out, and I think number one, you're really your own best advocate, and your story really is what matters. So I always fall back on that. It's the stories you have that really impact whether it's a legislator or even the agencies. But working through your lobbyists is important, I really think. But of course, the personal touch is always better. The story told by the one it affects the most really matters the most. And reaching out, it's really been difficult to understand the best way to reach people now. And I hate to complain about COVID all the time. And I've tried not to, but I just can't help it because it's been so difficult to connect with folks. But of course, email is great. Making sure that here's one of the things I've noticed. I'll give you, Tom, that's a really good question. Here's one of the frustrations I've got a real problem with. I've got a lot of folks that'll, they might have my cell phone number. They might not. They might text me. They might send me an email, whatever. But lately I've been getting a lot of messages through Facebook that I didn't realize, I'll get a Facebook message or they'll send it on Messenger. I might or might not see it. It might go to, I have a house account. I have a campaign account. I have my personal account. Plus you got all these emails. There's almost too much methods of communication to consolidate all that and make sure you're covering all the bases is really tough. It's always best to go right to my house email. Make sure my LA sees it. Steve Bartlow's my LA at the Capitol. So he knows, he sees everything I see. He can act on it. If I don't see it right away, he can get to me. And so I'm learning how to use my LA. That's probably been a learning curve that I've been a little behind on, to be honest. And part of that was our LAs weren't allowed in the building last session. We kind of brought them in on Thursdays just for 3 hours, but I really spent very minimal time with my legislative assistant last session. Typically I'd know him so well by now after a year. And same with my writer. And it's been difficult from that standpoint. But I think, I guess what I'd really, really advocate for folks, phone calls are good, but I might or might not get them at the Capitol. I've been just giving my cell phone out to everybody and just call me. And to be honest, that's the best way. I just soon talk to someone one-on-one. Emails are fine, but I usually follow up with the phone call anyway if I've got a phone number to call. It just seems to me a one-on-one conversation is always best. So from that standpoint, I guess an email is a great start, and then we'll move on from there. But my LA, it really helps if my LA sees this stuff and I can follow up with him.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions for Representative Burkle? Otherwise, we know you're very busy and we can let you go on to your next.
I'm seeing one in the chat here, Courtney. Oh. Just a sec. Following infrastructure bills currently in process. Yeah. So you're talking about their infrastructure money that might or might, and what kind of size we're talking about. Yeah, we are. I think one of the frustrations I'm finding is a lot of this money coming from the feds has strings attached or the language isn't very clear on how it can be spent initially. We're seeing that a lot I was just at a meeting in Warren, Minnesota on a nursing home situation. They're struggling there with their budget and whatnot. And there was, a lot of questions on whether or not some of the ARP money could be used a certain way. And I'm afraid, although the infrastructure stuff you would think would be a little more clear, but how the money can be spent and some of the timelines around it, we're watching that, and So to be honest, I'm hopeful that some of this could help me in Oslo, to be honest. Oh, that came out of the blue. So given the fact that we're looking at some federal money involved in the Oslo project, I mean, it could initially be, the initial idea was that would be like $100 million project. It's a small town. I mean, I'm realistic enough to know that a town of 400 or 500 people, but at the same time, people need to know that I think 17% of the wheat in the United States crosses over that bridge. So the U.S. wheat crop coming from, going back and forth over that bridge, ends up being 70%. It has a major impact on the economy. So we'll see what happens there. But when you've got a federal interstate, I-29 goes right through there, and then there's flood issues. So you're going to have the DNR and the DOT and MPCA and every agency you can imagine involved with something like that. And I'm hoping that some of the federal money could help us out there. So yeah, we're watching that close.
All right. Are there any other questions for Representative Burkle? Otherwise, we might let you go on with your next events of your day. We really appreciate that you were willing to join us today and talk to us about your experience in your first term as a legislator and your work on House File 1058. I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you this session. We'll be watching what you're up to.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, folks. We'll talk to you again soon.
Great. Thank you, Representative Burkle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we've got just a few more things to cover. One of the things that Tom and I follow really closely for MNSPE is the Minnesota Board of Architecture, Engineering, Land Surveying, Landscaping. I can get really close to you all, but it's a difficult list to memorize. But we follow the board really closely for MNSPE. We will work on memorizing that moving forward. But the board has 21 members appointed by the governor for 4-year terms. The professions represented are represented by 16 individuals, and they are complemented by 5 members of the public. The board chair is Paul Vogel. He is a land surveyor, and the executive director of the board is Doreen Johnson. The next meeting of the board is Thursday, November 18th at 11 a.m., and I plan to attend on MNSPE's behalf. Tom, I know you recently were in contact with Doreen. Do you want to talk about your relationship with her and what she was able to tell us about some upcoming things with the board?
Absolutely. Thank you, Courtney. And they definitely need to find a way to reduce that title down. We just call them the State Licensing Board because it's too many letters to make anything work. So in any event, but it's an important board. Obviously, it's important for consumers to protect the public, and it's important for engineers to have that profession regulated. And if you haven't been on the website, I encourage you to do so. A lot of really good information, everything from managing your license to listing of complaints to individual engineers. And they also you can sign up for a newsletter, and that newsletter I think is really helpful in terms of what's happening in the profession. So I would encourage you to do that. They also do a report every 2 years that's really comprehensive that can give you about everything you want to know on the engineering profession if you want to find it. But Doreen Johnson we've worked with her for years, over the past number of years on a lot of different initiatives, and we work very closely. There are a couple things they're going to be bringing forward that all of you will get a chance to weigh in on, but 2 that she had mentioned. One, they want to remove the 25-year-old age requirement for licensure. Actually, I didn't even realize there was an age requirement to be an engineer or for licensure, but they're going to try and remove that piece. And then secondly, more of administrative change, but to change the qualifications to modify the length of time you need to be licensed in order to serve on the board. So we certainly support their efforts, work with them to make sure that we're part of the solution, help support their funding. Every 2 years, they get funded by the state. And then lastly, I would just throw this out there. If you have any interest at all, I would consider you applying for a term to serve on the board. I think it's a great experience, a good opportunity, and they always need engineers to serve that role. It's appointed by the governor, and I think a good opportunity to serve. So with that, I know we're running short on time, so I'll kick it over to you, Courtney.
Thank you, Tom. I will make this real quick. This past session was incredibly unique. The legislature met for 18 months straight because of the governor's emergency powers. They had to come back every year. We had a record number of people of color, so the Posse Caucus had some really increased influence. The session was almost entirely remote, with members voting via thumb and voting at home, and via programs that validated that it was them via their thumb. So it was an incredibly unique year. Minnesota continues to have the only divided legislature in the country, which complicates things and makes things a little bit more interesting. That will not change for the 2022 session, which begins January 31st. This coming year is a non-budget year, but the governor will likely be presenting a supplemental budget because of all of the increased federal funding. We've got about $1.4 billion remaining in federal funding to be spent. This year is going to be a bonding year, so there's going to be lots of legislators hoping for investments in their communities. Bonding bills have to be bipartisan. They have to pass with 3/5 votes of all legislators in both bodies. This is also an election year, which complicates things when all legislators are up for re-election. And this is the year where we have redistricting, which happens every 10 years, which is a redrawing of the political maps. One of the things that's going to make this session particularly interesting is that we have new Senate leadership on both sides. Senator Gazelka has announced that he is going to be running for governor. He is one of 2 current sitting members of the legislature in the Senate running for governor. He and the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, Senator Benson, is also running for the Republican nomination. Senator Gazelka was previously the Senate Majority Leader, so he stepped down from that position in order to run for his position as Majority Leader to run for the Republican nomination for governor. That meant that Senator Miller, who was the Senate president, was elected by his party to be the new Senate Majority Leader. And then Senator David Osmek from Mound, Minnesota, was elected to be the new Senate president for this coming session. Senator Susan Kent, who is the Minority Leader, said that she will not be running for re-election. She wants to focus on time spent with her family, so she stepped down from her position as the Senate Minority Leader. And now Senator Melissa Franzen from Edina, Minnesota, is the new Senate Minority Leader and is the first member of the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus to have that position. So it's going to be a very different look from the Senate. That being said, really quickly, I know that Darren was just able to join. He is the chair of the Legislative Advocacy Committee for MNSP. I'd really like to give him the opportunity to plug his committee if he is on and available to do so at this time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Courtney. I was just able to join a few minutes ago, so it's just in time. My name is Darren Mielke. I'm the current chair of the Legislative Advocacy Committee for MSPE. I think we have a group of about 8 or 9, I think, on our committee. I don't know the exact number. But if anyone has any interest at all in learning about the legislative process or just promoting the PE license and trying to help protect that, I would encourage you to attend one of our meetings. We meet the 3rd Tuesday morning of the month, every month. For the most part, it's a very small time commitment. It's anywhere from a half hour to hour that we meet and talk about topics. So don't have to meet all of them. You can just try out a few of them. But I encourage you to, if you have any interest, all just reach out to me if you have any questions, and we'll definitely get you on our virtual meeting invite.
Great, way to get that in there. So with that, we have hit the top of the hour, or we're real close. If anyone has any last questions, let us know. This is Tom and my email. We really enjoy getting to work with Minsby at the legislature and appreciate that you all took the time to spend the hour with us. So thank you very much.
All right, well, please join me in thanking our speakers, both Courtney and Tom, as well as Representative Burkle today. Really appreciate you being with us and sharing what you have to share. We want to thank all of you for attending today's seminar. We look forward to seeing you at another MSP program soon. Have a great day. So.